Hey, folks. One of the things that has really become clear lately is the degree to which things that are happening at the local and the state level have a huge impact on the preservation of democracy at the national level. And so I'm really happy today to be able to talk with Ben Wikler, who is the chair of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin and who is working right now in a state Supreme Court race that's happening on April 1st that has huge implications for the rest of the country. So, Ben, thank you so much for being here.
Heather, thank you so much for having me on. We are in the final sprint in the first giant election of the new Trump-Musk era, and this is exactly the right time to have this conversation.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a number of things that we can walk through. First of all, I want to know what this race is that's happening on April 1st and why it's ultimately why it's so important. But what the race is, who's putting money behind it, and why they're putting money behind it, how they're using propaganda to try and turn people out for this election. But overall, what I'm really interested in is why does this state race matter so much to people around the country? And finally, I want you to tell us what we can do about it. So, first of all, what is this race that's happening on April 1st in Wisconsin?
So a lot of states don't do this, but in Wisconsin, we have elected state Supreme Court justices. They serve 10-year terms, and only one is elected at a time. They're elected statewide. So this is an election to the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, and whoever wins will determine the majority, the controlling vote. It's an open seat. There are currently 3 right-wing justices. There are 3 kind of, I would call them common sense justices. Republicans would call them more progressive justices. These 3 are evenly balanced, but whoever wins this race will decide 4-3 cases for potentially years going forward, because we don't expect another open seat well into the next decade. And what that means is that whoever wins in these next 18 days will make critical decisions on everything from abortion and reproductive freedom to cases involving democracy, potentially gerrymandering, election certification, workers' rights, a ton else. And there are 2 candidates in the race. On one side is Susan Crawford, who I'm supporting. Democratic Party of Wisconsin has endorsed. She's a common sense judge currently serving in Dane County. She came up as a prosecutor. Then she served in state government, did environmental enforcement, a lot of other things. And then in private practice, advanced voting rights and workers' rights and reproductive freedom. On the other side is Brad Schimmel. He is as MAGA as it gets. He's the former state attorney general under former Governor Scott Walker. And Brad Schimmel has been running a full-bore MAGA campaign. He's been saying that in 2020, when the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin didn't overturn the election on behalf of Donald Trump, he said that the Supreme Court had screwed over Donald Trump. He is running a campaign appealing to the biggest right-wing billionaires. We'll talk about that more in a second to try to get them involved. And it's pretty clear that if he wins this race, that there will be a massive MAGA thumb on the scale in Wisconsin's highest court. So this race is now it's a hotly contested race that there's still a ton of people that don't know about. And it's now the most expensive judicial election in American history because it's become a kind of proxy battle for MAGA, for Musk, for Trump, versus everyone else who believes in freedom and democracy and justice. And it's coming down in the state that is the closest state in the country, the closest state in 2024, the only state where 5 of the last 7 presidential elections has come down to less than 1 percentage point. So whoever wins this race could make decisions about whether future presidential elections are overturned or whether we actually hold fast to the idea of democracy in the United States of America.
Well, so you're saying it's very important, but we have a great deal of evidence that, in fact, the MAGA Republicans think it's very important as well. You just said it was the most expensive judicial race in history. Who's funding this?
Well, the second biggest donor is the biggest funder of the Stop the Steal movement. Dick and Liz Uline, who run the Uline paper packaging products company, they've poured millions of dollars into this race. That is par for the course in Wisconsin politics. There's something else, though, in this race, something new for Wisconsin. Elon Musk has made this race his personal priority. He's put in more than $10 million. It went up by 600,000 yesterday. It's more than anyone's ever donated to a judicial election in Wisconsin. And Musk is funding a kind of a propaganda apparatus, an organizing machine. He's pouring money in, and he's using X, his social media platform, to try to pump up Republican votes for Brad Schimmel. So he's taken a personal interest. Now, there's a couple sides to this. One is that 5 days before his first post on X, he filed his own lawsuit to try to bypass state law so he could sell Teslas direct to consumers in Wisconsin. So he has a personal financial interest in taking over the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. It's a return on investment if he can define what the Supreme Court's decisions will be on his personal business matters. But the other side is political power. If Republicans, MAGA, Musk, own the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, that both gives them a channel to try to suppress votes and to try to block things that would be of concern to them. It also would prevent a situation where someone might be convicted for violating state law and be outside of the pardon power of Donald Trump, because Trump can only pardon people for crimes that are federal crimes. So there's a lot at stake politically as well, and it sends a message. Because if Musk can buy an election like the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, then that will reinforce to Republicans that they should knuckle under and do whatever he wants. And it sends a message to Democrats that they cannot fight his flood of money. So there's a lot packed into this one race. And Musk has funded this to a degree that he hasn't been involved in any other election other than the presidential last year. It's a test case for whether Musk can buy American democracy and the judiciary in one swoop.
Well, and he's never invested in Wisconsin before, except in that presidential race, right?
That's exactly right. He funded the Republican Get Out the Vote operation in Wisconsin in the 2024 election cycle. And he and his partners at Turning Point USA, which is having a big rally in Wisconsin on Monday, they're kind of taking over the Republican Party. Donald Trump works for Musk as much as Musk works for Trump at this point. And the question is whether the controlling vote in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court will work for Musk as well.
One of the things that people asked me to ask you was about the commercials that they're running and what those commercials say and how that fits into this larger election. Can you speak to that?
So there's a two-track operation going on. One is the broadcast TV ads. Musk has a super PAC called Building America's Future that's run millions of dollars. It's about $4 million of TV ads, and now they're doing some digital and mail and different things. Those TV ads are all about crime and the fear of crime. They take cases out of context and warp the record and mislead people to try to paint a picture of Susan Crawford that can strike fear into the hearts of Republican voters. Brad Schimmel, the Republican candidate, as a judge, he actually has a pretty spotty record, like reducing the sentence and giving a sweet plea deal to a defendant whose lawyer gave a campaign contribution to Brad Schimmel. He doesn't talk about those in the ads, Musk doesn't, but it's all crime, crime, crime for the general public. But for the base, for Republican voters, it's red meat, partisan red meat. He's flown in canvassers from Texas, put them up in hotels. I heard this from the Waukesha Democratic County Chair. He's a white guy. His door was knocked 4 times by Elon Musk's door-to-door canvassers through America PAC, his kind of personally owned field turnout PAC. And the messages that those folks are giving to individual voters, not on broadcast TV, is literally Donald Trump wants you to vote for Brad Schimmel. Brad Schimmel will advance Trump's agenda. It is pure MAGA, uncut. His message to Republican voters is that if they want to advance Donald Trump's plan, then they need to put Brad Schimmel on the state Supreme Court. And Brad Schimmel is doing his part at a Turning Point USA event. Brad Schimmel said, I think he said, Trump has lost over and over in the court. The only way we stop this is through the courts, that we need a support network for Donald Trump. He's running to be Trump's guy on the Wisconsin court system. So Musk is kind of playing a two-faced game. There's actually a third face. He's running ads through a front group called Progress 2028, targeting Republicans with ads purporting to be from a Democratic group saying that Susan Crawford is super progressive. So he's trying to infuriate Republicans to vote against Susan Crawford on that basis as well. It is profoundly cynical, but his goal here is not to persuade people who, about the merits of the candidate. It is just to get kind of partisan warriors to show up and vote for Brad Schimmel. And that means that if you are not in the tank all the way for Donald Trump, we kind of need a huge coalition to turn out for Susan Crawford and make sure that Schimmel and Musk and Trump lose this race. We don't want this kind of tactic and strategy to work in future elections across the country, and we can stop it here.
Well, and that's really why I wanted to talk to you, is that a lot of people think that a Wisconsin Supreme Court race doesn't necessarily matter to them in a different state. But in fact, what is at stake here in a number of different ways is a really major piece of restoring American democracy. And I'd love it if you would take a little bit of time to talk through why Wisconsin is so important, why the state Supreme Court is so important, and why gerrymandering is so important.
So Wisconsin is a birthplace of the progressive movement. If you go back to the 19th century, Wisconsin was a state with a radical anti-slavery movement. The Republican Party was founded in Ripon, Wisconsin, as a radical anti-slavery party. Wisconsin was the first state where the state Supreme Court ruled unanimously, a very different court, that the Fugitive Slave Act was unconstitutional. That was after a riot broke out when federal marshals tried to re-enslave someone who'd escaped through Wisconsin on the Underground Railroad. Go forward a little bit in time. These kind of giant economic trusts, these huge kind of corporate monopolies arose, and the progressive movement rose up in Wisconsin. This champion whose bust is in our state capitol, fighting Bob La Follette, came up as a trust buster, fighting against the power of organized capital, supporting workers' rights, unions. There were labor massacres, and unions finally won critical battles. And fighting Bob La Follette and the state government were the first in the country to create unemployment insurance and workers' compensation, the first apprenticeship laws. Wisconsin was the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment so women could vote, the first state to have a statewide anti-LGBTQ discrimination law, the first state to have disability protections, the birthplace of Earth Day. It was a state with this deep progressive tradition that it exported. Wisconsinites wrote the Social Security Act and the law creating Medicaid and Medicare. And that was a history that I grew up on with great pride, that then slammed into this wall of right-wing money in 2010. So in 2010, in the Tea Party wave, a handful of right-wing billionaires, including the Koch network, funded this whole push in Wisconsin that flipped Wisconsin from a blue trifecta that year to a red trifecta. Republicans took control and then immediately changed the rules to lock in their power. With Project Red Map, they did the most intensive gerrymandering our state had ever seen, one of the worst in the country's history. They smashed voting rights. So they went after especially young people and Black people in our state. There was a state legislative assistant, like a staffer, who was in the meeting when the Republican lawmakers were briefed on the effect on Black voters and young voters of their voter suppression law. And he said that they were giddy, that they were gleeful. His phrase was frothing at the mouth when they heard how many votes it would suppress. That staffer became a whistleblower and actually left the Republican Party and state government to call public attention to this. It was adjudicated in court. Susan Crawford actually led the lawsuit against one of the worst parts of that law and was able to remove one part of it. But it was so successful at suppressing the vote that African-American turnout plummeted after that law went into effect. And that's part of how, and arguably more than responsible for Trump's victory in Wisconsin in 2016. Brad Schimmel has said proudly that he thinks that was responsible for Trump winning and Ron Johnson winning in 2016, that voter suppression law. They also went after unions. So this is always the tactic. When organized capital takes over government, they go after the power of working people. We've had a bigger decline in union density in Wisconsin than any other state in the nation in this 21st century. So they kind of wished for more wishes. They locked in power. And I've been chair of Wisconsin Democrats since 2019, working with folks who've been here every single day since that moment and much longer, year over year, fighting in the trenches to try to unrig our state. And we're almost there. We have a chance to win the majority control of both chambers of the state legislature finally in 2026, because we finally unrigged the state legislative maps. But if Brad Schimmel takes control with this state Supreme Court election, we know that he'll re-rig our state legislature and try to prevent any redress of these kind of scars on our democracy. So this race is the gating factor to whether we can undo the damage and make Wisconsin live up to the best of its progressive tradition, or whether we go backwards into these dark ages.
So one of the things I like to emphasize to people is that voter fraud, which is one of the things that MAGA Republicans insist is happening, is in fact really vanishingly rare. I think the statistic is you are more likely to get hit by lightning twice than you are to see voter fraud, than for people to commit voter fraud. But election fraud is something altogether different. That's when you rig a system so that a certain party wins, whether or not it's the party that the voters actually want. And Wisconsin has been ground zero for that, not only for the voter suppression that you just talked about, but also for gerrymandering. Can you walk us through what gerrymandering is and ultimately why it matters on a national level?
Absolutely. So gerrymandering is this time-honored, unfortunate practice in which lawmakers or judges in some cases draw legislative boundaries so that voters from a certain party or ethnic group or racial minority are packed into some districts and then cracked into multiple districts to dilute their power. So, for example, Sheboygan is a small town north of Milwaukee, pretty blue town. In Wisconsin, in 2011, when Republicans gerrymandered our state, they divided Sheboygan in half so that this blue town couldn't have a blue state representative, that it would be two different Republican districts, each containing half of Sheboygan. They did the same thing in communities across the state. And then they densely packed the African-American voters and Latino voters into these districts that are like 90% Democratic to make sure that they wouldn't have the power to affect elections across multiple state legislative districts. The result of all that is that in a state that's almost perfectly 50-50, where we've had, I think, 11 elections or 12 elections now that came down to 1 percentage point or less over the course of the century. In this 50-50 state, Republicans had nearly 2/3 supermajorities in both chambers of the state legislature, all the way from 2011 until those gerrymandered districts fell in 2024. This was the crown jewel of the Republican program of control. In Congress, 50-50 state, Republicans now have 6 of the 8 congressional districts. Now, in 2023, there was this fair maps movement that arose all over the state. Counties passed referenda calling for fair maps. People organized and fought for fair maps. In 2023, both thanks to that and especially because of abortion and the total abortion ban from before the Civil War that snapped into place in effect after the Dobbs decision overturned Roe versus Wade. Because of all that, in 2023, Janet Protasewicz won the Supreme Court seat in what was then the most expensive judicial election in American history, and ended the Republican control of their state Supreme Court. And Republicans in the state legislature saw the writing on the wall that their hand-drawn districts protecting their total control might go the way of the dodo. And they tried to impeach her before she took office to prevent her from ruling on the constitutionality of their gerrymandered maps. But we were able to organize a huge pushback campaign. The Republicans backed down, and the state Supreme Court reviewed the Constitution, which said that legislative boundaries have to be contiguous, meaning a continuous line. And they pointed out that there were little islands literally disconnected from the rest of the district in 2/3 of Wisconsin state legislative districts. So they struck down those maps. We got fair maps in the state legislature, and Democrats flipped 14 state legislative seats in 2024 and could get all the way to majorities in 26. The state Supreme Court has not yet considered our congressional maps, and Republicans are in a kind of panic that if those are reviewed by the state Supreme Court, they might get de-gerrymandered too. So Republicans are running ads explicitly talking about holding on to control of the U.S. House of Representatives. That could be at stake in this election. If you look at North Carolina, when Republicans took the state Supreme Court in 2022, they gerrymandered that state. That grabbed 3 House districts for Republicans, which is the size of the Republican House majority right now. So if Republicans hadn't won the state Supreme Court in North Carolina, Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries, would be the Speaker of the U.S. House at this moment. And Republicans see the next fight like this as Wisconsin. If we stop them here, they can't hold on to gerrymandered maps by exercising kind of MAGA fiat control of our state courts. And those implications stretch across the entire country because the House is a central part of the fight over whether we'll be a democracy nationwide.
So this is, I think, is a great example of a state race, a state Supreme Court race that has enormous implications for the protection of American democracy and the restoration of American democracy. Because with this state Supreme Court in Wisconsin, you're not only looking at the control of Wisconsin itself and perhaps the Wisconsin congressional delegation, but also whether or not gerrymandering is going to be able to stay after the next census, which we do every 10 years, and on the basis of which we divide up new congressional districts and new state districts. Is that right?
That's right. So because we have these 10-year terms, the impact of a state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin can extend for a very long time. And typically, the power only changes hands when there's an open seat. We have state Supreme Court races in 26, 7, 8, 9, 2030, but those might all be incumbents running for re-election, and no one's lost a re-election bid after being elected in Wisconsin for more than half a century. So control of the majority of the state Supreme Court all the way through the 2032 redistricting process might hinge on what happens in the next 18 days in the state of Wisconsin. And that affects congressional maps and maybe the House majority through 2042, 17 years from now. The impact of what happens with a small number of voters in this one state in this little period of time will affect all of us for a generation to come. And just to put an even finer point on that, If you go back over the last 15 years, we've had 2 state Supreme Court races that came down to less than half of 1 percentage point, about 2 votes per precinct in our state, less than 10,000 votes. So if someone spends a few hours volunteering and calling voters here, they could help to flip a precinct. They could help to flip a statewide election that affects the U.S. House majority until my 7-year-old is 24 years old.
So that actually brings up the next question. And that is, one of the things that we know from talking about media and the way people are affected by media is that nothing is more powerful than fear, which it sounds like the Republicans are really running on in Wisconsin with the idea of crime that you're talking about. But there is actually one thing that contests that and that people are as enthusiastic about, and that's inspiration. And one of the things I think that's so interesting about this Supreme Court race in Wisconsin is that in a funny way, it seems small, but it's actually a way to put skin in the game, really to protect American democracy. Whether you're a Democrat or an independent or a Republican, what you're really standing for is not one character versus another character, or even necessarily one party versus another party, but rather the idea that we should be represented by the people that we want to have represent us, which seems like is pretty thin on the ground in a lot of places today. If that's right, tell me what people can do in these next 18 days, and perhaps afterward, if there's ballot curing involved, in the next few weeks to be part of this great Wisconsin experiment.
You're absolutely right. And the best tonic for fear is the sense that you actually have power to change the future. When people feel helpless, they retreat, they tune out. And that is so often the game for authoritarians, is to make people think that they don't have any power to change the situation that they're in. And right now, if you're watching the news and watching what Musk and Trump are doing to this whole country, and you're trying to figure out, is there any way to fight back? There is in Wisconsin in this moment. If you make phone calls, join our virtual phone banks, they're happening every day from wherever you are in the country. You'll call people who voted Democratic in the past, people who were confident would support Susan Crawford if they knew that she represented Planned Parenthood in Planned Parenthood versus Brad Schimmel, that Supreme Court case, if they knew that she is someone who believes in democracy and Elon Musk is the one supporting Brad Schimmel. So you're calling people who are grateful for that information. And the time you spend as a volunteer in a race like this has a much bigger effect than it does in a presidential election, because so few people even know about this race. There was a poll that found that more than half of Wisconsin voters don't know about Susan Crawford yet. So you're calling folks and giving them information that they can immediately put to use, and they will thank you for it. I've been knocking on doors the last 2 weekends. People are grateful for hearing about this and finding out they have a chance to fight back. We set up a website because we discovered that when you tell people about what Musk is doing, they're infuriated and they want to get involved to oppose Brad Schimmel. So we set up a website called peoplevmusk.org. And if you go to peoplevmusk.org, you can click and volunteer. You can click and donate. You can chip in. Also, just go to Susan Crawford's website, Crawford for Wisconsin.org. You can donate to her there. Donating helps us to get the message out. Volunteering helps us to get the message out. And if you want updates, I should say, I've just started posting updates on Substack. So if you look for Ben Wikler on Substack, you can find the post that I'm sharing. I'm doing another one tonight with updates on this race. And I'll be sending out volunteer links and donation links. There's a ton that folks can do. And frankly, there's no upper limit on the number of hours between now and when polls close on April 1st, on Tuesday, April 1st. If you're in Wisconsin, you can knock on doors and you can go out. We'll train you. You can go out with a buddy the first time. It is beautiful outside. It is extremely satisfying. And we can show ourselves, the country, the entire world, that Elon Musk cannot buy our democracy, that MAGA doesn't have the final word here, that it is still possible for people power to prevail in this moment. So there's this huge long-term effect on whether elections will be overturned, as Brad Schimmel seems to want to do, on whether maps will be gerrymandered, on whether abortion will be legal and safe in Wisconsin, or whether it will be outlawed as it was in 1849 when the original ban was passed. But there's an immediate effect to showing Republicans who think that Musk can bail them out with his billions of dollars if they just follow him over a cliff, shredding Social Security and the Veterans Administration, to show Republicans that Musk cannot be a shield if they do something that is hideously unpopular with voters, and to show Democrats that they can have the courage to fight back. that Musk can't simply buy off voters, that if they do the right thing and stand up for their principles, that the public can have their back and win elections like this one. So I think what happens right now will send a message to the whole country and whole world about whether there's hope in this moment of darkness. And it's one reason I'm so grateful for the chance to join you today on the show.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, and thank you for all that information. And I want to urge people, if you are interested in making sure people know about this race, that you go ahead and you share this video as well. But I just want to say personally, Ben, you and I don't really know each other, but one of the things that I find so impressive with what you are doing is, in fact, Wisconsin's extraordinary history as a state that's protecting democracy and that has protected democracy. And of course, one of the great leaders in that was Robert La Follette, Fighting Bob La Follette. And he came from, not a famous background, and he came without a lot of political power. But what he did in Wisconsin was he organized people from all parties to stand up against the people in his era who had taken over American democracy for themselves. And those are the ones we know as the robber barons. So to see you here bringing together people in Wisconsin and around the country to push back against Musk and his ilk is extraordinarily heartwarming to me. But it makes me think that you are this generation's Bob La Follette, Fighting Bob La Follette. And I don't say that lightly, so you should take that to heart. And thank you for everything that you are doing.
Thank you. I can't imagine a higher compliment. And I'm deeply honored on behalf of all the people who are fighting back against the robber barons in our state. And there are a lot of them, from Governor Evers to grassroots volunteers who were knocking doors in the wind and the snow all through this winter to support Susan Crawford. This is the fight of our times. And this is the first test of whether we can survive this dark moment in our democracy. And if we can win this race, I think we can spread hope in a place where hope is sorely needed and send it out across the country and around the world. Thank you so much for having me on.
And thank you for being here. Good luck to you.